What's up everyone, I'm Austin at Spur Design Garage. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the new Acura Integra and trying to figure out a way that we can make it a little bit more interesting and maybe have a little bit more flavor of the original Integra from the 90s. This is how I would modify mine if I were to buy a new Acura Integra in 2022. Alright, so welcome to the redesign. This is the late 90s Acura Integra. This current version is the Type R. It's vibrant, bright yellow, very distinctive, interesting looking car. And one of the reasons it's so distinctive is these shapes that are in here, like this trapezoidal grille, as well as this very forward moving wedge shape that it has. And obviously, most importantly, these circular 4-quadrant lights. Very interesting and make the car feel very distinctive from anything else on the road. All these shapes break down into a very interesting and unique character. Even these little side markers look like an interesting feature that may not be found on many other cars. You get this giant spoiler in the back, and this all promotes this very unique view of the car on the road. Even the 4-door version that is a little more tame still has this very forward moving wedge shape and these very long and lengthy taillights that are in there that stretch further than most taillights did back in the 90s. So just very distinct and interesting. And this contrasts with the modern Integra. Even the shelf-like rear end on this car is pretty unique and cool. When we go to the modern car, it's a handsome looking car. There are some interesting details on here, and it does feel like an Acura, but there's nothing on here that really visually differentiates it from cars on the road or other Acuras in a very unique way. And I'm not saying that we have to do everything in a very retro manner, but I'm always looking for ways to add a little bit of distinction to these vehicles. So as we go through this redesign, I'm going to be briefly explaining my thoughts behind some of the decisions that I'm making. This is sort of how I would modify the Integra if I were to have one of my own. I think obviously first and foremost has to be a two-door coupe. Give it that incredibly sporty feel. Make it feel a little bit more like the original. Of course, I'm going to throw a wing on here. I'm going to give it a little bit more of a nostalgic feel through the tail lamps. A few differences within the color. Right now, I'm photoshopping out some of the background that was appearing in place as I lowered that roof line. And I want to make this thing look as natural and as factory stock as I possibly could. Obviously, they did not announce a Type R version or a 2-door coupe, which is a disappointment, but I understand that they're appealing to a different consumer type nowadays than they were back in the 90s, so it makes sense that they made these choices. I, however, would want mine to be a little bit sportier and unique. I'm going to try to make these tail lamps feel a little bit more like the original, very wide. And this actually feels fairly modern to me. There's a large trend of tail light bars going on nowadays, and I don't want to stretch it quite to that extreme, although I did play around with that idea. I think overall this is a really nice looking vehicle. It was a large disappointment for a lot of people, primarily for the reasons that I'm mentioning. There's not a lot of nostalgic touches here, which isn't always a bad thing. But in this case, for me personally, I would want a little bit more of that nostalgic feel. But overall, this car does feel like it'd be very sporty and fun to drive with the 6-speed manual. Let's start to integrate a little bit more of a distinctive light catcher down by the ground line. blend those colors in so it looks a little bit more realistic. I'm going to make sure that these lines flow through all the way through the rear as well. You'll notice I rotate the page quite a lot, and that's just to make sure that I am understanding correctly what's going on perspective-wise, as well as proportions. When you flip the canvas 180 degrees, you can actually tell a lot of those things. This is especially true when you're sketching. You can flip the paper over, look at it through a light, and you'll be able to tell some differences within proportion or perspective. So that's what I'm doing on this canvas, rotating and flipping as often as I can. We're going to enlarge these rims just a little bit, give it a little bit more of a sporty feel. Nothing too crazy. And of course I had to throw a spoiler on there. I feel like that's a very, very telling part, a distinctive part of the original Type R that was so cool. I'm going to simplify the body side a little bit and just give it a simple light catcher up towards that shoulder line, like the original as well. I don't want to do anything too nostalgic, but just giving it a little bit of that flair from back in the day. Outlining these lights so they appear like they fit into the body side just a little bit more realistically. Now here I'm playing around with that kind of full width tail light just to see how that looked, but it didn't appear like it was going to look too great. Just I feel like there was a little bit of a pointy nature to it. And now we're going to make sure that this thing really looks like a two-door, adjusting those door handles, the light catchers, and we're slowly getting there. I just want to make sure that some of those door lines that were in the original 4-door are not there. And later on, I'm going to go add those 2-door lines in there, reveal a little bit of shut line, and that'll help describe some of the body side as well, showing how the form changes, catches light, catches shadow. Try to make it just look as factory and realistic as I possibly can. It's these little details that make these things look so much more realistic than if I were to let this slide and not reveal that. Here I'm using a color layer, so my layer style is on color, as it would be, another example is multiply, overlay, on color, and then I believe I'm using a white brush or a black brush, and I'm getting rid of this yellow body side. And what I'm trying to do here is, I always thought that the original white and red accent Type R was super cool. So that's what I'm trying to do here. So I'm going to fill in this area that's yellow. Make sure we get a desaturated layer over the top. And I filled that in. Now there are some artifacts kind of around the edge, so I'm going to go fill those in as well with a hard brush. Make sure that none of that yellow line is staying there. And this is kind of reading a little bit gray right now rather than white. So I'm going to duplicate that layer and I'm going to brighten it just a little bit and turn it on different layer styles to try to make it look realistic. Not really feeling those yellow exhaust tips for this particular concept. Getting a little bit of the reflection of the yellow in the body side, make it look a little bit more like it's fitting into this scene. Then again, just like the 90s version of the Type R, adding some of those red accents and trying my best to make it look as realistic as possible. Let's start to carry over that light catcher from the side of the vehicle into the rear. Help it look a little bit more cohesive. And I like the way that this light catcher is flowing into the top of that license plate surround. Bring in a few more details. Of course, have to have the nostalgic Type R logo on there. Now I'm just going to start to play up some of the contrast a little bit, maybe emphasize a few body lines or forms, give them a little bit more shadow or a little bit more highlight, and blend in some of the blue from the background. Adjust the layers, trying to get just a little bit more contrast into the overall image, make it a little bit more exciting and impactful, but not too much. I think some of that extreme contrast was making it look a little bit cartoony. And of course, you have to sign your work. All right, so what do you think? Is this a cool interpretation of the new Acura Integra, or do you like the original better? Let me know in the comments, and also let me know how you would create your own Acura Integra. Would it be a 2-door, 4-door, white, yellow? Thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments, feel free to drop them down below and I'll get back to your questions. And feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed watching this video.